Welcome to the Women's Connection. I'm Barry Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Women's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. I never knew so much about prostitution or sex trafficking until I moved to New York in 1979, and I wound up in ER at Bellevue Hospital. I was sick, throwing up my guts, and there was this prostitute being interviewed by the Center of Disease Control, and she was screaming, "Get me out of here, get me out of here." She didn't want to talk to him because her pimp was going to kill her. Well, her pimp showed up, and it was like Twilight Zone. I mean, it was like not to be believed. But that was in 79. And I understand that sex trafficking and prostitution has not really decreased. It basically has increased. And with me today is a woman who goes around the world and tells people, or young women especially, how to protect themselves and trains them on sex trafficking. And I would like to welcome Romy Solomon, who is going to share a lot of information with us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today.
Tell us exactly what you do.
So I consider myself a trainer and youth leader in terms of anti-trafficking, focusing on human trafficking prevention. So that really encompasses everything from what you talked about with sex trafficking, as well as labor trafficking, organ trafficking. What I do is I've actually, through the Peace Corps and the Fulbright program, I've worked in Eastern Europe, going into rural areas and villages where a lot of this information cannot get out, and I do lead trainings for young people, teaching them about common methods traffickers use, how they can protect themselves, how they can verify if a job opportunity is real or not, and in order to prevent them from ever becoming victims of trafficking.
What was interesting is when I was doing some research on this, it was like online dating has got a big scam with it. You have to be very careful because a lot of these young women are very susceptible.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing of it is it not only affects women, it affects men.
Absolutely.
Or young men. I mean, it was just mind-boggling. How did you decide that this is what you wanted to do?
It is an interesting story. So when I was 16 years old, I gained my first exposure to international development. I spent a summer in Thailand doing community service, living in a rural area, doing various activities. But it was really the first time when I was walking in the streets of Bangkok, that I ever really saw young girls who were my age at the time, so around 16, who were standing in the streets. We don't like to call them child prostitutes because in the field, really what they say is that, there's no such thing as a child prostitute. It is a child victim of trafficking because no child grows up and wants to become a prostitute. It's either the situation is forced upon them or they have no choice in terms of their economic situation. So what happened was I first saw that. It was my first kind of inkling that something was going on, but I didn't really know what it was. And actually, when I was at university, I went to the University of Maryland in College Park. There was a student group that was putting on a documentary about child sex trafficking in Asia. And they had undercover footage of these men pretending to be Johns, or what we call customers for these victims, into brothels, and there was just young children lined up between the ages of 3 and 7 years old, and they just said, "Take your pick," and and it was undercover footage. So I left that screening. It changed my life. I left that screening in tears. I called my father, actually, or I think he called me, and he said, "What's going on?" I said, "This is what I want to do with my life. I want to end, trafficking, which is essentially modern-day slavery. I can think of nothing worse in the world than someone who is forced to do something against their will and has absolutely no liberties in their life." So I'm very thankful to the Peace Corps that I went to Moldova, a country that has a very big problem with human trafficking, and from there I kind of continued working in this field.
Well, one of the things that I just heard this afternoon when was that there's a big area here just in Queens where you can stand on the street corner and you see all this action going on. I mean, it's like, if it's so blatant, how come somebody is not doing something about it?
You know, you bring up a really great point, Barry. So first of all, when a lot of people think about human trafficking, and even when I watched that documentary in college, nobody was talking about how it's happening here in the U.S. And it's very prevalent. It's happening everywhere, all over New York City, not just Queens. You'll find in Manhattan, every borough. California as well as Florida are also major states with high rates of human trafficking. There's a few things about it. It is everywhere. So I don't know if you saw, there was a big campaign recently in New York where they found that a lot of these manicure and pedicure places, these women are, they're the woman who is doing your nails, the nail salon, the manicurist, I couldn't find the word, the manicurist, they are actually not being paid proper wages. And so they're forced to work there. They're working usually very long hours, not getting fair wages, maybe not getting anything at all. And so it is everywhere around us. We're not so open to it. So if we're not educated and we don't know about this and the types of places that this happens, massage parlors, manicure and pedicure salons, for men, agriculture and construction are major industries that rely on slave labor. And that's like in Florida. I mean, not just in India. We're talking about in Florida where our tomatoes come from, things like that. It's everywhere, but people aren't really, if you're not educated, you don't know where to look for it.
How can I do something? Let's
Okay.
start there.
Yeah, so what can people do? So I focus on prevention work. So there's actually what we call the 4 Ps of anti-trafficking. You have prevention, protection, which is really focusing on rescuing victims and rehabilitation. You have prosecution to ensure that, pimps and traffickers are held to the justice system, as well as partnership. So we believe in the anti-trafficking world that no change can really happen unless we all work together and build coalitions. I can say that every single member of society, every actor has some way that they can help in anti-trafficking, whether it's a lawyer who's donating their times to help survivors of trafficking go up. I mean, one of the hardest things when you were talking about numbers, right? So it's very hard to, it's estimated that over 35 million people right now in the world are enslaved. And that's more slaves now than ever.
Wait a minute. You just said 35 million people worldwide.
Right now, as we speak.
That's unbelievable. So they start at a young age.
Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be. You can have, I focus on working with youth and educating them, but there's lots of stories of women, men. I worked with mothers and fathers who were trying to support their families in Moldova, Romania, I'm sure right here in New York as well, that are trying to support their family, that are looking for opportunities. So when traffickers and pimps, they know that, and they prey on those people who are vulnerable, who are looking for economic income, and they offer them these job opportunities that are too good to be true. You'll make so much money with not that much time, or it's okay if you don't know the language in America, and it's okay if we'll bring you to the U.S. It's okay if you don't know English. These kind of promises that look too good to be true usually are. And traffickers use that so that it doesn't matter if you're a child, a newborn baby, a grown woman, or a man, everyone is susceptible. It's not that they start young and then continue in that field.
What you're saying is it spans all ages, probably even up to the grandma age. And one of the statistics is a pimp can earn like $150,000 per year per prostitute.
That's really interesting. What they say about trafficking as a business, and it's actually the fastest growing industry in the world. and it's the fastest growing, and it's number, I want to say, 3 in terms of most profitable. So there's the trade of guns, arms, and steel, the drug trade, and the trade of human beings, essentially. It's always between number 3 and number 2, but essentially, and this is the most awful thing that I've ever heard a pimp say in an interview, was that the reason why selling people is so profitable is because it's actually like, instead of selling a gun, it's a one-time deal. Humans can constantly be reused, which is so awful if you think about it.
It's not only awful, it's sad, and it makes you want to cry. All right, so let's go back. How does somebody prevent somebody from getting into this position in the first place?
Okay, so that's what I really want to focus on when, it's so important to do victim assistance and rehabilitation and rescue, absolutely, but I really believe that the only way we're going to end trafficking is through prevention and by reducing the demand as well. So what I do is really going in and educating young people. Here are common methods traffickers use. So there's something called the lover boy model, which is all over the U.S. There was just an article recently in the Times about this happening also in New York. Essentially, it's, again, pimps and traffickers preying on the most vulnerable young women who come from hard backgrounds, whether they're orphans or they didn't grow up with conditional love from their parents, whatever their background story is, preying on these young women, courting them, pretending that they're in a relationship with them, pretending that they love them. And these young girls who have never felt love before and don't know even what it's like, grab onto that and hold on to that. And then really through a lot of psychological manipulation, these traffickers then convince them to start selling themselves for sex. And those girls never receive $1 of that money. The pimp, that trafficker, holds on to all of it. And so what I do is try and I go and talk to young girls as well as young boys, but really try and open their eyes to see what's the lover boy model, what are common things that he says, how you should be aware if you're in a situation. I mean, it's such a serious situation that oftentimes when police do get wind of these kind of underground operations and they go and do these busts, some of these girls don't want to leave, and nobody can believe it and say, wait a second, you're being exploited, why don't you want to leave? But it's because these girls say, no, this is my boyfriend, he loves me, we're in a relationship together. And that's where a lot of, when people think about trafficking, there's a lot of these big blockbuster movies, that really focus on victims being smuggled through borders or held through a lot of physical violence as well. Sure, that stuff does happen, but it's really not the majority. The majority of trafficking happens actually legally through borders. So I know I've heard of a lot of situations where they go by plane. They get passports for them. Once they overstay their visa, they bring them back for one day to renew it again and go back. I mean, a lot of it is done through legal matters. And a lot of it is not through physical violence, but through psychological violence and emotional violence. When you are really manipulating people and you say, if you don't do this, I know where your family lives, I know where your sister is, I'm going to get your sister, and she's going to come here and do this. And when you're constantly, up at gunpoint, hearing those things, I mean, you will do anything.
Let's start at the beginning then. How does a perpetrator find its victim?
So through various different means. For example, where I was working in Moldova and Romania, it's so easy. Any street that you walk down, you will see huge posters that say, work abroad, job opportunities in the United States, in Western Europe, in Russia, really anywhere. And that's basically when you're dealing with, trafficking outside the States. So, they're selling this dream of a better life, essentially. And some people from these countries are in such, desperate situations, they'll do anything. They'll say, okay, and it will say, no work experience necessary. You can make 500 euros a month, which is a lot of money for someone in a very small, poor town and wherever they are. And they call them. They have a phone number. They have an email address. They have usually a website that looks very legitimate. They have a website that they have testimonials from other people. I mean, these people have a lot of money, so they're able to pay for what looks like very legitimate businesses, but it's all a front.
With what? Okay, that's Europe
Mm-hmm.
or the Eastern Bloc.
Mm-hmm.
What about here in New York?
Same thing, what I was talking about with the lover boy model, right? So if you go into it doesn't even necessarily have to be a rough neighborhood. What about today's day and age with Facebook, social media, any Instagram, Snapchat, all of these avenues, these media channels that we use? Yes, they increase communication and they make our lives, they definitely contribute very positively to our lives, but unfortunately they make it a lot easier for traffickers. So it's very common for traffickers to write a girl in New York, in Idaho, in the Midwest, and start sending there's so much written up about this, about people sending photos with Jay-Z and Beyonce, and they have photos. These are pimps and traffickers who find their way into these celebrity parties. They take photos with celebrities and they start sending it to girls and saying, you're beautiful, I saw you on Facebook, or I met you in a chat room. I think we should get together. I live this extravagant life. And with celebrities, if you leave where you're from, you can, come hang out with me and party with celebrities. We can make a lot of money. A lot of girls from the Midwest who dream of an exciting life outside, in the city, they will, grab onto that in a heartbeat and say, this is my chance to leave.
They go out, the pimps. Is it only men or is it also women pimps?
Very good question. So think about this. If you're a young girl and you have two people offering you an incredible work opportunity, whether it's a man or a woman, who are you going to trust more?
A woman.
Of course. That's why there's a lot of women who are traffickers and pimps, a ton of them. I know some people say the majority are, but I don't know about that. We never truly know, but there's a lot out of there. And usually usually it's a couple, and a man and a woman can work together in that sense, where the woman is at the beginning stage is trying to coax the victims into this and build trust and rapport so that they trust each other, and then the man ends up, controlling them with physical or psychological abuse and controlling all the money that comes in.
How do you identify a person who's in this situation?
It's always really hard, and I'm, as someone who's in it, I oftentimes get myself into situations where I'm super hyper aware, but you never really know, right? So things that I personally look out for is, especially at places like hotels or airports, those are main key things. It doesn't matter if it's in the U.S., internal domestic trafficking is just as much an issue. So, for example, if you're in a hotel and you see a man and a woman checking in together and she doesn't have any luggage, or she's not saying much and he's kind of trying to do all the talking for her, and or if there's a big age difference between them and just something, I think what happens is a lot of people see things and they're like, oh, something seems a little bit off, but nobody wants to say something, or no one feels, well, I don't know what could happen. I want to encourage everybody that it doesn't matter, if you are not sure, you have an inkling, the most important thing is that you call someone. There is a hotline in the U.S. Polaris Project has this incredible, even texting now. You can text any tips you have, because it's always rather to be safe than sorry. Other things that you look for in airports are definitely if the man, or if it, even if it's a woman, right? So if a woman is traveling with her, if someone seems to be constantly controlling and taking control over the identification documents, like a passport or an ID, if the victim's not encouraged to talk, because that's how a lot of people get in this situation. They say, okay, I'm going to go to New York, I'm going to get a job, let's say in a massage parlor, or a lot of times it's nannying, babysitting, all of those au pairs, that happens Upper East Side, New York. You never know. There's no place that's safe from trafficking. That's what I'm going to tell you. But being aware of, when they arrive and they say, I want this job, they are forced to hand over their documents to another person. So and once they don't have control over their identification, and usually if they don't know the language very well and they don't know how to call 911, they don't know all that, basic information that I try to teach people before they leave or go abroad, then, that they get in trouble. So being aware of who's controlling the identification cards or information, and who's saying things. I actually was once in a situation where I knew that, I don't know if she was a victim of trafficking or if she was by choice there as a prostitute, but I witnessed a situation where I knew something was suspicious, and they were at a restaurant, and I went over and said something, and I kept trying to ask her questions, and she just would look at him and would not say anything, and he kept answering for her, even though I kept saying, "Where are you from?" And he would say, "She's from here," or, "What are you doing?" And he would still answer. And sometimes in those situations, it can be too late. And if I said something, or if I said, "If you're okay, here's if you ever need help, here's my phone number." First of all, you don't know if he's connected with the traffickers or the pimps. I could get in trouble. She could be beaten for, giving off these signs to others that she was in trouble. You never know. And that's really why I want to focus on prevention and focusing on that to end it before it happens.
I'm just speechless. It's like, okay, somebody needs to go to all the different high schools, even here in the city, or not even high school. I think you have to start from what you're saying at a younger age.
Absolutely. I'm a huge advocate for talking about this starting in middle school, even in 5th grade, even younger if you can. I had to actually fight a lot of people on this, because when you talk about human trafficking, people instantly think about sex trafficking, and they think it's a topic that's too risque and shouldn't be mentioned to young kids. But if you walk into a class of 5th graders, as I have, and I've asked everyone in the room to raise their hand if they're on Skype or Facebook or any other social media link and have been contacted by a stranger, every single person in that room raises their hand. So it's now is the time to be talking to young people, middle school, high school, university students. I mean, there's no one who, I think everyone needs to be educated about this, because we're living in a technological world where it's so easy to connect with people and meet new people, and now with online dating and things like that, it's very common to meet someone on the internet and then meet them in person. And we've created a culture where those are the norms, when we need to really think more critically about who we're meeting, what kind of information we're giving out on the internet, and are we protecting ourselves. So another common thing is I really encourage young people not to check in on social media all the time, because do you know what checking in is?
No, I don't.
It's essentially, if you post a photo with you and your friends and you say, "Hey, we're hanging at this restaurant downtown in New York," and you check in that, okay, this is the restaurant that we go to. Anyone can see that information, not just your friends. And if you're someone who doesn't constantly, a lot of people if you get a friend request, they just accept it. I will only accept friends on my social media who I know and I trust, because if any kind of information that I have, traffickers study their victims. It's not, this image and idea of pimps and traffickers that are, dumb idiots you see in the movies. They're like these big brute guys. No, like traffickers can be very well dressed, very handsome to lure women. They study their victims. They look at where are these people hanging out? What are the common restaurants, bars, cafe shops that they go to? And they'll even go to those places. They can see all that information when they check in, and they'll go to those places and find a way to strike up a conversation with them. So it seems, oh, we just met by chance, but actually I've been studying where you've been hanging out, and I knew you'd be at some point at this coffee shop.
I'm aghast. It's just mind-boggling. I have been getting a lot of friend requests from people, and it's like, who are you? You don't have any friends. Why am I friending you? Very suspicious. I delete them very fast.
Yeah,
I just
you have to do that.
Going forward, what are you doing to empower the youths of today?
I really strongly believe that every person, it doesn't matter how old you are, can make a difference. So I always tell the students that I'm working with, you're never too young to make an impact in your community or globally. But really what I do is I actually, in addition to training young people on these methods traffickers use, what is trafficking, how it works, I then take it to the next step and empower them to make a change in their community. So I deliver trainings on project planning, how to turn your vision into reality, how to market a project, how to fundraise a project, how to find your personal passion and interests or talents or hobbies and use that to address trafficking. So some of the things that I've done or the programs that I've done have been the Freedom Fighters Academy in Romania or the Freedom Ambassadors in Moldova, and I'm now working with Leap for Change here in the U.S. to continue doing this work. But things that I've seen I'm so excited about is young people finding what they're passionate about for this cause. So I had students who said, I'm passionate about art. I'm an artist, but what can I do? I can't do anything. And I tell them, okay, well, what would you be interested in doing? How can we use art for this cause? So I actually watched young teenagers in high school, these artists creating these gorgeous, beautiful paintings that had to do with trafficking as well as other issues. They created their own art exhibitions and sold all of those paintings, and all of that money then went to help survivors of trafficking. Or I worked to empower a group of young boys who were obsessed with what they call football or soccer. And they said, okay, we want to hold a soccer tournament. But, for me, when you talk about human trafficking, it's not an isolated issue. Human trafficking is really one big issue. It's not one big issue. It's lots of small issues that comprise to make this issue. So you really need to look at the root causes, which are gender inequality, poverty, lack of economic opportunities, lack of professional opportunities, lack of education about the issues. So addressing all these issues. So these young boys who were so passionate about soccer, they said, okay, let's make a soccer tournament. But where they were, it was very uncommon for women to ever participate in such a thing. So they made this a day about empowering young girls to get involved and play with the boys and play soccer. It was a tournament. Everybody chipped in a little money to participate in the tournament, and we were both tackling the stereotypes about women, that and gender, as well as raising funds for victims. We've also worked with let's see, other situations. There was a group of students who said that they wanted to become doctors. And they said, well, we want to be doctors. What can we do? So I actually empowered them to reach out and talk to different medical nurses and doctors in their communities and learn about, when a victim goes to a doctor after they've experienced this, terrible psychological and physical torment, what are things that doctors need to know to be aware? Because a doctor can't ask questions that they would ask a typical person to a victim or a survivor of trafficking. They need to be very sensitive of the issue, very sensitive to what they're asking. So these young students actually started interviewing different doctors, and they created their own pamphlet of questions and things to ask to make sure that you're being sensitive to potential victims and how to spot those victims. So there's many different ways and avenues you can tackle trafficking. I'm trying to think if there's any others, but those are just some ideas to show you that it doesn't matter if you're passionate about the arts, sports, business development. I've seen lots of cases of social enterprises pop up that donate their profits to survivors. Or also, a main thing is that a lot of these victims, once they come back, they're plopped back into their community with the same issues. I don't have enough money. I can't make a living here. So what do I do? So looking at business owners and empowering them to actually hire survivors of trafficking, providing that economic opportunities so that they will not be re-trafficked. Re-trafficking is actually a huge issue. So even after victims come back, are rescued, rehabilitated, that they actually end up becoming re-trafficked because we're not dealing with the main issue, that they need money. So businesses like that support survivors are also extremely helpful in the cause.
I was just curious to know what happens once they snatch them, because I heard something about the time frame. Like you have a certain time frame to save someone before they hit the border and they're gone. You just disappear, or I don't know.
It really
it varies, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
it might be here
It really varies in every situation. So I would say that I wouldn't be able to give a time frame because you never know how someone's traveling. They could be traveling by bus, by plane, by train, and there's really not. To me, I think it's so important to reach out to these people before they hop on that bus or before they take that job opportunity. That's why hotline numbers that people can call in even before they go abroad and say, here's a job opportunity from this company, but I'm not sure if it's legitimate or not. Providing those kind of resources to people so they can have more critical thinking and understanding about the job that they're going to go into.
But doesn't the onus also have to do with the individual checking up on things, or is it just they're in such dire need that they grab at anything?
Yeah, it's both. It's about dire need, but it's also about imagine you grew up somewhere in the Philippines and you grew up in a community where, it's very different from Western culture where everyone works together. There's a strong sense of community. Your neighbors are kind of like your aunts and your uncles that you've grown up with, and everyone is there supporting each other. So if you have even an uncle or a neighbor, someone who's saying, okay, I actually have a connection in the United States, if you're looking for a job, there's that idea of, okay, that person's going to help me, is going to do whatever they can to help me. I'm not going to think about, wait a second, they're asking me some weird information or, things to be careful. Okay, this job opportunity said that they will, no, I don't have to worry about the housing or the visa or anything. They are going to take care of all my travel, everything. Those are red flags to be aware of, and explaining that it doesn't matter if it's from a family member, a loved one, anyone. I mean, these are red flags that everyone should be aware of. It doesn't matter what community in the world you come from.
In the closing moments of the show, which I hate to cut off, what would you like to leave the audience with?
It's so hard. It's such an all-encompassing topic, and I'm really passionate. But I guess what I want to end with is there's so many organizations and incredible organizations that go out and educate and raise awareness, and awareness is absolutely key to make some kind of change in the world. But it's not enough, and what we need to be constantly doing is empowering all members of society, whether it's young high school students in high school, whether it's lawyers, business owners, whether it's parents, educators. I mean, every single person in society has a role, and it's not just enough to be educated, but to learn about what you can do to prevent it. So I encourage you to read up on Polaris Project. They are the leading anti-trafficking organization here in the United States. They run and manage the hotline number. They always provide incredible links to find organizations that are in your local community, whether you're in New York City, whether you're in Ohio. I mean, everywhere there is an organization, because this issue is so pervasive. So find organizations close to you, learn about what you can volunteer, what you can do, and just don't be afraid to take action, because it's so important. It's up to citizens like all of us to do something. Otherwise, this will continue going on for many, many more years.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been such an enlightening conversation. It's frightening. It really and truly is frightening. And I hope you've learned something. One website that I found, in addition to Polaris, is traffickinghotline.org. And they have a hotline. It's 1-888-373-7888. Please stay safe. Please be aware. Please get involved, because you know what? The person that you may save might just be a relative. Thank you so much. Hope all's well with you. And if you have any questions, please write us here at the Women's Connection. Bye now. I'm just finishing up a taping with Romy, and one of the things that we didn't talk about was senior trafficking. So what's going on with that?
So I would say that I don't really have proper data or numbers on senior citizens. We don't usually talk about it because there's such a focus on child trafficking, but I really want to say that every person, regardless of their age, is at risk, and I would never encourage senior citizens to think that they are, they could never be vulnerable. I was saying that one thing that could happen for senior citizens maybe would be organ trafficking. And so what happens with organ trafficking is that people are promised medical services, and compensation for organ parts, usually kidneys, that they can live with only one, they don't need two. So they're promised, transportation and travel, a full medical, a licensed doctor to, do the surgery, and proper recovery care, no problem, and then they get compensated for that organ. However, what typically happens is that this is done in an environment that's not sterile, usually with a doctor that is not licensed or a practitioner, and so there's a lot of causes of infection, just malpractice. It's really awful conditions that I've seen photos of, and eventually these people, they don't go through proper rehabilitation and care, so they think, okay, I can live with one kidney, but nobody tells them, and they don't go through the proper recovery period, and they've suffered so much infection that what happens is they're actually for the rest of their life disabled, and they can't work, or they can't. It really takes a toll on their life. Some people lose their lives. That's very common, and these organs are actually sold on the black market. So things like that to be aware of. Also, in relation to senior citizens, being aware and thinking about who, for elderly that have caretakers, being aware of who's taking care of you. A lot of these facility homes rely on young people to take care of their senior citizens, and unfortunately some of those people are domestic slaves, so they are forced to work long hours. They are taking care of the elderly, but they're not being paid for it, with very harsh conditions and living conditions, no water or food, things like that. So also elderly should be cautious of who's taking care of whom and things like that.